Welcome back to another Political Breakfast. We are so glad to have you here listening on WABE. Always glad to have our loyal listeners with us for another chat. I'm Lisa Rayam, and with me here today are our strategists, Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Democratic strategist Tharon Johnson. Hello to both of you.
Hello. It's a great President's Day. I know that Tharon, wherever he is celebrating President Trump today, and maybe genuflecting in front of the photo of mugshot from Fulton County.
Celebrating with a smile, right, Tharon?
Yeah. Yes, look, no matter who the president is, whether it's Barack Hussein Obama or Donald J. Trump, we definitely celebrate President's Day. And yeah, thank you, Lily and Lisa, for cooperating with this technical setup that we have to go through every week, but it worked out, so we're going to make it.
It worked out. Yeah, a lot of people lost power over the weekend. Did you all sleep? Did you sleep through the storm? I slept through the storm. I slept through the storm. I missed it completely. Woke up Sunday morning to all this chaos and what happened? And a lot happened Saturday night going into Sunday morning. Did you all lose power?
Yeah, I woke up to the flashing lights from the coffee maker, which is always a pain in the neck. But, I mean, I'm lucky. I'm not complaining. Of all the things that could have happened, me having to reset my coffee maker clock probably isn't the worst. No trees down. But, boy, going to church on Sunday, you could definitely see the detritus all over the street, the aftermath. Yeah.
What did I sleep through? Yeah, it was a mess out there.
It actually woke us up.
Me too.
And now, when I bought all this expensive furniture for outside furniture, our designer was like, you want to get heavily weighted furniture because, if you ever have a storm and the wind picks up, it'll blow off. Well, thank you for doing that. But there was a couple things that I've been storing that China wants me to get rid of now, particularly this heater that I've been trying to preserve, but it didn't make it. It got damaged pretty bad. Shout out to Georgia Power. Like Brian, I got up early that Sunday morning and actually drove around the streets of Atlanta and Sandy Springs and Roswell. And the crews were out early removing trees. And I saw pedestrians, too, on some of these major thoroughfares helping remove tree limbs. And so, this is what makes Atlanta special when we have these type of storms. We all pull together to make sure that people can restore power.
Yeah, thousands lost power and thousands had their power restored rather quickly.
But Lisa, if you slept through it, it must mean you don't have a golden retriever because I have a golden retriever, and so whenever the storm was pounding on the windows, the golden retriever jumped into the bed and snuggles right on my back. And as soon as the storm passes, he goes to the foot of the bed. But boy, when it's hitting, I don't know what he thinks I'm going to do, but he wants to make sure we're fur on skin.
Yeah, Brian is the savior. Brian is the savior. Quickly want to mention Doug Shipman Friday announcing that he's not running for re-election for the Atlanta City Council. So before we jump off today, wanted to just pay homage to Doug Shipman. He's always been a friend to the podcast, friend to WABE and Morning Edition, and just want to wish him well. Didn't go into great detail, but just said he had some family matters that he wanted to take care of, and he was stepping back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lisa, for allowing us to just spend a few minutes on a man who I've known for a long time. Before he was a council president for the city of Atlanta, I met Doug when he was working for the Central Atlanta Progress. He went on to run the Woodruff Arts Foundation, Woodruff Board there. Was very happy to have him come on. He did some good work there. And he was always that guy who you just knew that one day this gentleman was going to want to serve the public, and he decided to run for office and won. I did have a brief opportunity to speak with him on Friday, and I don't want to politicize this decision at all, but for those of us who know Doug, he's a very, very open individual, and he right now, Lisa, just asked for prayers and privacy for his family, and we didn't get into any politics. So, Doug, I just want to let you know that we are praying for you, brother. We love you. He's done an outstanding job as council president, and we will look forward to hearing next steps for him. But I definitely wanted to take a time to honor a person who's a dear friend, who's a public servant, who has served the city well.
Yeah, and always available to come on and answer any question and all the tough questions. He was elected in 2021. He'll complete his current term, which ends in 2026. Governor Kemp was doing some traveling. He was in Munich, Germany, and answering some tough questions about, what's going on here in Georgia at the CDC. Some layoffs taking place as a result of some policy changes at the top with our new president.
I know they have some layoffs at the CDC and other things, but, government can stand a little right sizing.
Any thoughts on that? And, some of his remarks, making the news as well. Brian?
I am not surprised at all to see Governor Kemp's comments. He is always disciplined and on message and always has a great political ear for what particularly his base wants to hear. And of course, he's been able through the years to weave together his base plus the independents in Georgia who approve of the job he's done. And his job approval ratings gives him the leverage and the leeway, you might say, to go out there and stick to conservative principles, even if it means a loss of incomes coming into Georgia from the federal government. Obviously, the CDC isn't just something that does disease control for the nation and to some degree the world. It's also a jobs center for Metro Atlanta. So it hits a little differently here. But these federal programs are spread throughout the entire country, not just CDC, and they're seeing cuts. 4 out of every 5 federal workers I saw over the weekend work outside of the Beltway. So these cuts will be spread out a bit around the country. Atlanta may suffer a little more because we are one of the biggest federal jobs centers outside of D.C. in the country. Like Denver, for example, is another one. So there are a few that have a large number of federal jobs, and we're one of them. We've seen Kemp do this before. When Trump has talked about, attacking electric vehicles and the electric vehicle mandate, stuff that you could argue benefits Georgia, as we have the Hyundai plant going up in southeast Georgia. Potentially, we don't know, still up in the air, the Rivian plant out in East Georgia, which is on hold for now. You would think Kemp would be like, hey, we need this. We've already like plowed the land. It's time to get going. You promised us this. You can't back out. Instead, what Kemp said was the federal government shouldn't be picking winners and losers, even if Georgia is a winner. So we've seen a through line of his comments that have stuck to conservative principle, even if it's not in this old pork barrel mindset that has always kind of been we're against too much spending, but don't touch our military bases in our state. We're against we won't cuts, but don't cut this program that helps our universities and colleges. He's been very consistent, and it's not a shock. And look, it's also a reminder that Brian Kemp always has his eyes on the horizon. He has to deal with today. He keeps saying, my focus now is on the session and tort reform and doing my day job. But you can see baked into his comments that he is keeping his political options for the future open and alive, and he's not going to do anything that would offend a national Republican base. He's not going to have any soundbite that can be used against him in a future Republican primary. Again, extraordinarily disciplined and on message on these issues.
I was going to say, though, but he knows how to seize the moment with a soundbite. Would you say?
Well, as Brian just outlined, this is a governor who I think probably takes a few trips a year, and is put on the national stage and always finds a way to get thrown into a federal conversation. And he does his best to bring it back to Georgia. But yeah, Brian just kind of outlined that politically he doesn't want to say anything that may get him sort of sideways with Trump's party, because it is Trump's party right now. But the thing I would say is this, Lisa. He talks about that the federal government every now and then needs a right sizing, right? Every now and then we need to look at a right sizing. Well, let me just say this, and I know the governor knows this. There's bureaucracy and then there's people. All right, there's bureaucracy and then there's people. And most times the two go hand in hand. I think that as a Democrat, Lisa, I'm always open to looking at ways to streamline bureaucracy and make sure that it works for all people. But what I'm very, very concerned about is the lack of compassion that I see from some Republicans when it comes to how these layoffs are going to affect the people's lives. I read a story this week about a veteran who did not know this was coming. Has served at the CDC honorably for a long time and was under the impression that they will still have their job. And now with this just abrupt firing from Elon Musk and others who believe that we need to downsize or right size a very, very important federal department, is very, very concerning to me, because where's the compassion? The Republicans won the election last year because they said they wanted to represent everyone, right? They felt like they had the narrative of the people. And so I want to say that I think that what's happening at the CDC, we should all be very concerned about, because these are men and women who have served this department honorably. Yes, it has increased its staff. Yes, there has been some challenges there, but it is the CDC. It's the Center for Disease Control. We don't depend on it until we need it. And say what you want to say about the CDC. They weren't perfect, but they were the go-to federally funded agency during the deadly pandemic, right? And the work that they're doing right here in Georgia, in DeKalb County, is so monumental. And so I want to say this today, that I think the Republicans are going down a very slippery slope here with all of this quote-unquote cutting bureaucracy. But the people, Lisa, the people are going to be so affected by it. The jobs that these folks are losing, they woke up one morning thinking that their jobs were safe. They think that they're doing a good job. And there's really no merit-based explanation of why these people are being fired. I mean, it's got to be a metrics-driven strategy. That's what you do in business. You have a merit-based, metrics-driven strategy of why you got to downsize. And so I think that you're going to see state leaders. I know some Democrats have already gone to the well of the House and the Senate and spoken out for the workers. And I'm going to be very clear. I'm not criticizing Governor Kemp for his comments. He did exactly what Brian just outlined. If you're a Republican right now in this country, Trump is watching. Not only is Trump watching, his people are watching. And then, Elon is right there by his side with his son watching too, right? And so you got to be very careful about what you say. But I'm going to say this, mark my word, in February of 2025, Democrats, we have an opportunity here to show compassion for the workers. And these people did not elect a president that they thought was going to go this far. You hear Republicans saying, oh, he's doing what he said he was going to do. Well, Lisa, where is the merit-based, metrics-driven strategy of why you're cutting these folks' livelihoods off? And it's not going to just have an impact on them, but their families. The last thing I would say is this. We're going to get into this later, but I would say this. I was very happy to hear that Governor Kemp wants to focus on issues that matter to Georgians first, right? He wants to deliver on the promises that were made to Georgia. Well, there are a lot of those promises. Clearly, he's out there all in, pushed his poker chips all in with probably a ace-king suited hand right now. It's not aces because it's going to be a little fight, but I definitely think he's ace-king suited with trying to get tort reform passed. But there's other big issues. The prison system, which we read about this week. Also, Medicaid expansion, where you had 3 Republicans sponsor a bill that came out of the Senate. Speaker Burns, who, by the way, Terry England, get well soon, my brother. I know Brian shares me of that. He had a horrific accident. So Terry England, if you're listening, Speaker Burns staff, we definitely are praying for him for a speedy recovery.
Sure.
So the governor has so many Georgia-based things that he's got to work on. We still got ICE right now picking up people. Brian heard me talk about this, a man who was wearing an ankle bracelet, who, worked honorably, was a family man, was just picked up by ICE and delivered. That's made national headlines. And so there's so many things that we're talking about. But I think the governor knew that he was going to be asked about this. He definitely will probably in the future show some compassion for the workers. But I just wanted to make that contrast. That's okay to have a conversation about too much bureaucracy, but there are people's lives involved, and these non-merit-based, non-metrics-driven strategies of cuts, I think is going to have a big impact on us in the future.
I have some agreement with what Tharon is saying, and I have some thoughts on why it's playing out the way that it is. I agree that in a perfect world, let's take the CDC as an example. Maybe some of these probationary employees are people who have done research at their colleges or universities or in previous jobs that is of great interest and a need for our country and for the institution. And I prefer a scalpel over a mallet approach to these job cuts. But I think what's playing out here is the Trump administration learned from its first term with ruthless efficiency. And what they determined was that ruthless efficiency was what was needed if they were going to change the size and scope of government. And that if they did the scalpel approach, that the forces of opposition would be given time to coalesce and to try to stop it. And so what they tried to do was come in and just lop off a portion and then see where we're standing and put all the pieces back together as needed to have the same level of services but with less let's say, bloat if you are under the impression that there's too many federal jobs. So but now the pressure is on them to make sure that we don't have something like the wreck of those planes over at the Potomac a couple of weeks ago, where you could argue that, the federal government dropped the ball. Obviously, in that case, it wasn't the FAA. It seems pretty clear today that helicopter was in the wrong place and that it was an equipment issue, perhaps. But going forward, if there is a problem, if there's a natural disaster and FEMA is incompetent, if there is a disease outbreak and CDC drops the ball, the Trump administration is in control now, and the buck stops with them. If you take action, I think this is one of the hardest things to tell public officials. If you take action and the public knows it, you own the issue. And that's why, in many ways, the people who get reelected do nothing. Doing nothing is the safest thing you can do in politics, right? You don't piss anybody off. Maintain this. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
I don't know about that.
But,
really?
If there's a crisis,
for some,
an exception if there's a crisis. Exception if there's a crisis, then you've got to perform. But maintaining the status quo is the safest way to reelection. He is not maintaining the status quo. Republicans own these issues, and they need to get it right.
Now, did you feel that way when you were talking about Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms? When you said that she was, I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
Look at Lisa with the clapback this morning. Okay, Lisa, that's exactly where I was going. And I know, look, Brian doesn't need me to defend him. He's a grown man Republican living in this Trump world. But real quick on that, I know we want to kind of move on. But Brian said something that's so key here, right, Lisa? It's hard to take the politics out of the politics here, right? Because CDC had to know that they were going to be a target. But Brian said something that is so profound. These are women and men who have a specific knowledge and experience on issues that affect our world and global sort of existence, meaning we need people in the room who know how to fight deadly pandemics. We need people in the room who has done tremendous research when it comes to deadly diseases that are probably even here in the U.S. or coming. We need those folks who've had that on-the-job training that can make sure that we are prepared to not only defend ourselves from attacks that we see coming, but the ones that we don't even know exist. And therein lies the challenge. I mean, I've been doing a lot of reading on this. I mean, some of these folks who are being laid off, Lisa, are people who, and Brian used the term probationary period, right? But these are new employees, but these are also people who have been there for a while. And so, look, I agree with B-Rob, and mark this down. If we have to go back and find it, Lily, I want to mark this down, that the Republicans now, they own it. They own it. And it's going to be left up to Democrats to make sure that they figure out the best way to communicate to the public that they're doing everything they can to not only save us from what the Republicans are doing, but what is our role in this transition? Because one thing that the Trump administration has made clear, everything's on the table. Everybody is on the table. No one is excluded. I think the only department they haven't really touched yet is the Defense Department, which we know is the biggest budget, and it's probably, many people would say, is the most important. But everything else, Lisa, from USAID.
The Pentagon's next.
Yeah, so the Pentagon's next. So when he starts going into the Pentagon, Lisa, I mean, that is where I think you're going to hear some people starting to say, all right, buddy, you're going a little too far. But no, they own it now, and I think that we just got to show that compassion for the people.
Yeah. Yeah, and longtime listeners know that if there's one issue where I am very conservative, it is on spending, right? It is deficits and debts are reckless, they are irresponsible, and they hurt America's future. Previous generations have left my generation, and which is X, and the millennials and Zs, and those behind them with a major problem, and it has been very selfish. We owe it to them to do something. And it's not just discretionary spending, which is what Elon Musk has been focused on. That's important. We got to do something about entitlement spending. And I'm going to say it till I'm blue in the face, and even though it makes me very unpopular.
Back to Governor Kemp, though, and considering his rhetoric, do you think he was setting the stage? Was he sounding more like a senator candidate, do you think? Or was he sounding like Governor Kemp?
I think he sounded like Governor Kemp. I mean, I didn't see anything new there, and he has made it very clear he does not and will not talk about running for Senate until after the session is over. There will be tremendous pressure on him to make a decision quickly from Washington and from other candidates who might want to run in Georgia to get out there. Look, if he says I'm going to do it, the field clears. There's one person who clears the field, and it's him. Otherwise, we're going to have a lot of people coming out of the woodwork to come after what polling has clearly showed is a vulnerable incumbent. Polling has shown that Kemp is the strongest candidate and has a wide lead on Ossoff. Everyone else is competitive with him. So that's not a place you want to be if you're an incumbent like Senator Ossoff. I've said I don't think Kemp's going to run. But again, there's a lot of pressure on him to do so. The numbers are very clear. It does keep him in the game in a way that rolling out of the governor's office wouldn't. But, and sort of like keeping open the possibility of a run in 2028, et cetera. But he wouldn't like the job. And I think he would even be honest with us in his rollout. Like, this ain't something I want to do, but the future of the nation's too important. True conservatives need to be in this, and we need to get the seat back for Republicans. There's a way to message it, but would he like being there? No.
So what we saw just now is an evolution of Brian sort of reminding himself that he has been pretty defiant on this podcast that the governor will not run for U.S. Senate. And I actually back him up on that. Why? Because he's in the Republican circles a little bit more than I am, but I know that my relationship, and I haven't heard this directly from her, but I know that First Lady Marty Kemp will play a key role in whether or not she wants to leave Atlanta, Georgia, Athens, Georgia. I think they have something over it is in Madison, Georgia. Like those, just basically this state to go to Washington, D.C., whether that's going as a First Lady to a U.S. Senator candidate or being possible First Lady to a presidential candidate. So I think she will have a great deal of influence there. But what Brian did there, just Lisa, is that there are signals that show that there is a path if Kemp decides to want to do it. But all indications lead that he is so focused right now on being governor. Now, let's just go ahead and I can say something that Brian can't say. I believe this, and maybe Brian can't say this. If there's a poll that comes out, or there's a pathway in 2 years that shows that you have a president, Donald Trump, which if he keeps along this trajectory, I believe that Republicans know that he could be in the 30s. And Brian has said this. If he's in the mid 30% approval rating, below 40, there are going to be some Republicans that are calculating, hey, do I just sit tight for another 2 years after the 2 years? And then do I just run for president? And I think Kemp has got to be in that conversation, right? I mean, you just got to have him in that conversation. So I think the decision is not U.S. Senate or don't do anything. I think it's, hey, U.S. Senate is over here. We got our eyes on looking at where the president's going to be a year or two from now. And if we're going to do it one more time, why not go for the highest position in the land, which is the president of the United States of America? What I think they're calculating here, Lisa, is where's the electric going to be? I mean, right now, I had to remind myself, we're still less than 30 days into this Trump administration.
Yeah.
When we get to about 3 months and 6 months, if this president starts to look like because I guarantee this bromance between Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it's not going to last a year.
It's going to crumble.
Right? And one of those alpha males are going to step up and say, you know what, I'm tired of you
I'm
telling
out of
me.
here.
Yeah, I'm out of here, right? So this bromance will end a year from now. The question is, does Trump surround himself with enough experienced people to survive the bromance once it's over in 2 years? And I think that is what Kemp's looking at. I think this. Brian Kemp said it best himself. He is focusing on tort reform. He's focusing on getting that passed. He's also focusing on getting a lot of his budgetary issues passed as well. And I think we'll have another conversation to see where this bromance is, where Kemp's approval rating is with the state, probably around June or July. And I think then you'll start to see a lot of these speculations kind of materialize as far as what his political and future would entail.
Yeah.
All right, a good place to end this podcast. We're going to come back later in the week. We're going to have to talk about this next week. This came across my phone. Atlanta's Inspector General resigns after being in this big feud with the mayor. I don't know, accusations have been flying about trying to stop all kinds of investigations, what have you.
So this just happened?
Yeah.
Well, let me say this real quick. You know, that's interesting because I want to applaud the mayor and the city council. You know, one of the things I know you guys covered on Morning Edition is that there was a vote that happened for them to move to the next step to basically amend the city charter about how the IG, how she could actually do her job and what access she had. And so this was a very courageous vote, and the mayor has shown tremendous leadership on this. And, sad to hear that it led to a resignation, but ultimately I think the city's got to come together and move forward from this.
All right. We'll talk about that later in the week. Thanks, guys, for stopping by and joining us for another edition of Political Breakfast.
Thanks, guys. Good to be with y'all.
Happy Black History Month.